The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Valley as Shakira Martinez pulled into the parking lot of the Mountain View Inn. At 48, she had traded the harsh winds of offshore oil platforms for the gentle breeze of this small Colorado town. Her weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, old habits from years of fighting against platform storms at sea. The Mountain View Inn wasn't much to look at. 2 stories of faded brick, 24 rooms, and a lobby that smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. But it was quiet, predictable, and a world away from the dangerous life she'd left behind. "Morning, Shakira," called Tom Bradley, the inn's owner, as she walked through the front entrance. His gray beard was neatly trimmed and his flannel shirt looked like it had seen better decades. "Ready for another exciting day of checking people in and out?" Shakira managed a small smile. After 15 years as a safety inspector on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, exciting had taken on a different meaning. She'd seen rig fires, equipment failures, and storms that could tear metal like paper. Excitement wasn't something she missed. "Just the way I like it," she replied, settling behind the reception desk. The computer was old but functional. The phone rarely rang, and most guests were either hunters passing through or city folks looking for a quiet weekend in the mountains. Pine Valley had a population of 847 people, according to the welcome sign on Highway 285. It had 1 grocery store, 1 bank, 1 school, 2 churches, and Murphy's gas station, the only place for 30 miles where you could fill up your tank. The town existed because of the highway, serving travelers who needed food, gas, or a place to sleep on their way to somewhere more important. For Shakira, that simplicity was exactly what she needed. Her transition to Pine Valley hadn't been immediate. After leaving her platform job 18 months ago, she'd spent time in Denver, trying to figure out what came next. The noise, traffic, and constant urgency of city life had felt overwhelming after years of structured platform routines. She'd tried working for an environmental consulting firm, but corporate politics and profit-driven decisions reminded her too much of the oil industry's worst aspects. A chance conversation with Tom Bradley at a Denver coffee shop had led to the job offer in Pine Valley. He'd been looking for someone reliable to help manage the inn, and Shakira had been looking for a place where she could disappear into routine and quiet. The arrangement had worked perfectly for both of them. Her first year in Pine Valley had been an adjustment. People here moved slower, talked softer, and didn't seem to carry the constant tension she'd grown used to in the oil industry. They waved at strangers, left their doors unlocked, and gathered every Friday night at Joe's Diner to discuss everything from weather to local politics. "You settling in okay?" asked Margaret Collins, a regular guest who visited her sister in Pine Valley every few months. She was a retired teacher from Denver, always carrying a book and always curious about everyone else's story. "Getting there," Shakira answered, processing Margaret's check-in. She'd learned that people in small towns liked to know your business, but they were also respectful enough not to push too hard for details.
What they didn't know was that Shakira had seen things that would keep most people awake at night. She'd been one of only 12 female safety inspectors in an industry dominated by men who often resented her presence. She'd crawled through burning equipment compartments, rappelled down damaged rig legs in 40-foot swells, and made split-second decisions that saved lives. The scars on her hands told stories she'd never shared with anyone in Pine Valley. The long one across her left palm came from grabbing a piece of twisted metal during a platform fire. The small round mark on her right wrist was from a chemical burn when a valve failed during a routine inspection. Each mark was a reminder of moments when everything could have gone wrong.
One scar she never talked about was the psychological one from Platform Bravo, 3 years before she'd left the industry. A rookie inspector named Danny Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, had fallen through a damaged grating during a routine safety check. Shakira had been supervising the inspection and had seen the grating's stress fractures minutes before the accident, but hadn't acted quickly enough to prevent Danny from stepping on it. He'd survived the fall, but with permanent back injuries that ended his career. The official investigation had cleared Shakira of any wrongdoing, but she'd never forgiven herself for the split-second hesitation that had cost a young man his future. That incident had planted the first seeds of doubt about whether she wanted to continue in such a high-stakes environment. But those days were behind her now, or so she thought. The inn had become more than just a workplace for Shakira. It was a sanctuary where she could control her environment and minimize the kinds of life-or-death decisions that had defined her previous career. The guests were generally pleasant. The problems were manageable, and nobody's life depended on her technical expertise. Tom Bradley had been patient with her learning curve. The inn's computer system was ancient by industry standards, and the reservation procedures were informal compared to the rigorous documentation she was used to. But the work was satisfying in its simplicity: clean rooms, friendly service, and the kind of predictable routine that helped quiet her mind. In the evenings, Shakira would sit on the inn's front porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and listening to the quiet sounds of a small town winding down for the night. Children rode bicycles down empty streets, neighbors chatted across fence lines, and the biggest excitement was usually the arrival of the evening freight train that passed through town without stopping. She'd developed a few friendships, though she kept them casual. Dr. Sarah Chen, Pine Valley's only physician, had been particularly welcoming, and they developed a habit of having coffee together on Sunday mornings before church. Margaret Collins had introduced her to the town's small book club, where they discussed everything from mysteries to memoirs. But Shakira was careful not to reveal too much about her background. When people asked about her previous work, she would say she'd been in industrial safety and leave it at that. Most residents assumed she'd worked for some manufacturing company or construction firm. The complexity and danger of offshore oil platform operations was beyond most people's experience. Chapter 2. Undercurrents. 3 weeks into October, the first unusual thing happened. Shakira was working the evening shift when Jake Murphy burst through the inn's front door, his face flushed and his hands shaking slightly. Jake owned Murphy's gas station, a modest operation that had served Pine Valley for nearly 40 years. His father had built it, and Jake had taken over when the old man retired 15 years ago. He was known for his friendly manner and his ability to fix almost any car problem with creativity and patience. "Shakira, you got a minute?" Jake asked, glancing around the empty lobby nervously. "Sure, Jake." "What's going on?" He approached the desk, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Something weird's happening at the station. I've been getting fuel deliveries right on schedule, but my underground tanks are reading lower than they should be." Shakira frowned. In her oil platform days, fuel discrepancies were serious business. Even small, unexplained losses could indicate equipment problems, theft, or worse. Leaks that could create environmental and safety hazards. How much lower? Started small, maybe 50 gallons here and there. I figured it was normal evaporation or measurement error, but it's been getting worse. Yesterday, I was down by nearly 300 gallons. That's not normal leakage, Shakira. That's something else. Jake's gas station was more than just a business to Pine Valley. It was a lifeline. The nearest alternative fuel source was 37 miles away, a significant inconvenience for residents who commuted to work or needed to travel for medical appointments. If Jake's station had serious problems, it would affect the entire community. "You check your equipment? Pumps, gauges, delivery logs?" "Everything's working fine. Gauges are accurate, pumps aren't leaking, and my delivery guy swears he's been giving me the full amount." Jake ran his hand through his thinning hair. "I called the fuel company, but they say their records match what they delivered." Shakira's mind was already working through possibilities. Fuel theft was common in some areas, but Pine Valley wasn't exactly a high-crime location. Equipment failure could cause inaccurate readings, but Jake seemed confident his systems were functioning properly. That left the possibility she didn't want to consider: an underground leak. "You notice anything else unusual? Strange smells, wet spots around the tanks, anything like that?" "That's the thing," Jake said. his voice dropping even lower. 2 days ago, I caught a whiff of something near the back of the station. Kind of a petroleum smell, but not where it should be. It was coming from the direction of the creek. Shakira felt something cold settle in her stomach. In the oil industry, petroleum smells where they shouldn't be meant only one thing: a leak. And underground fuel leaks were serious business. They could contaminate groundwater, poison soil, and create fire hazards that threatened entire communities. She'd dealt with similar situations on offshore platforms, where fuel leaks could pollute ocean water and create explosion risks. The technical principles were the same on land, but the consequences could be even more severe. Ocean water could dilute and disperse petroleum contamination, but groundwater moved slowly and could carry contamination for miles. Jake, you need to call the state environmental office first thing tomorrow morning. This could be— I already did, he interrupted. They said they'd send someone out next week to take a look. Next week, Shakira. If there's really a leak, what happens between now and then? She knew exactly what could happen. Underground fuel leaks could contaminate groundwater, poison soil, and create fire hazards. In a small town like Pine Valley, where most people relied on wells for their water supply, a significant leak could affect everyone. The state inspector's casual timeline frustrated Shakira, but didn't surprise her. She'd dealt with similar bureaucratic delays during her platform career. Regulatory agencies were often understaffed and overworked, prioritizing emergencies based on immediate threats to human life rather than potential long-term environmental problems. Let me think about this, Shakira said finally. I might be able to help you figure out what's going on. Jake's relief was visible. I was hoping you'd say that. I heard you used to work in oil, and I figure you know more about this stuff than anyone else in town. The assumption made Shakira uncomfortable. She'd deliberately kept details about her background vague, preferring to be seen as just another resident who happened to have some technical knowledge. But Jake's situation was triggering all her professional instincts about potential safety hazards. After Jake left, Shakira sat alone in the lobby, staring out at the quiet street. She'd come to Pine Valley to escape the constant pressure of safety concerns, the weight of knowing that one small mistake could lead to disaster. But old instincts were hard to ignore, and everything Jake had described sounded troubling. That night, she called her former supervisor, Carlos Rodriguez, who still worked for Gulf Coast Safety Inspections. Carlos had been her mentor during her early years on the platforms, teaching her how to read equipment systems and assess complex risk factors. More importantly, he'd supported her advancement in an industry that didn't always welcome women in technical roles. Shakira, good to hear from you. How's retirement treating you? It's not retirement, Carlos. Just a career change. Listen, I need some advice about a potential underground fuel leak. She explained the situation in Pine Valley, describing Jake's observations and concerns. Carlos listened without interrupting, which told her he was taking it seriously. In their platform days, he'd had a reputation for asking detailed questions about potential problems, never dismissing concerns as trivial. You're right to be worried, he said finally. What you're describing sounds like a significant underground leak. The question is where it's going and how fast it's spreading. Jake mentioned smelling petroleum near a creek. That's not good, is it? Definitely not. If fuel is reaching surface water, you're looking at environmental contamination that could affect a large area. The state inspector needs to get out there immediately, not next week. Carlos's confirmation of her concerns made Shakira's stomach tighten. She'd hoped her professional paranoia was making her overreact to what might be a minor problem. But Carlos had been assessing petroleum safety issues for 25 years, and his judgment was usually sound. Any suggestions for what I can do in the meantime? Be careful, Shakira. Underground fuel leaks can create vapor clouds that are highly flammable. If there's any ignition source nearby, a cigarette, a car engine, even static electricity, you could have a serious fire or explosion. The warning reminded Shakira of Platform Delta, where a small fuel leak had gone undetected for weeks before being discovered during a routine inspection. The leaked fuel had created a vapor cloud in an equipment compartment, and only luck had prevented an explosion when a maintenance worker used a power tool nearby. After hanging up, Shakira stared at the ceiling of her small apartment above the inn. She'd moved to Pine Valley to escape exactly this kind of problem. But she also knew that her background gave her knowledge and skills that could help protect people who had no idea they might be in danger. The next morning, she made a decision that would change everything. Chapter 3. Investigation. Shakira arrived at Murphy's gas station before sunrise, carrying a small toolkit and wearing clothes she didn't mind getting dirty. Jake was already there, preparing for the morning rush of commuters heading to work in larger towns down the highway. "I didn't expect you this early," he said, looking surprised but pleased. "In my old job, early morning was the best time to inspect equipment. Fewer people around, better lighting conditions, and you can often smell things more clearly before the day heats up." They walked around the station together as Shakira examined the layout. The main building housed a small convenience store and Jake's office. Behind it were 2 underground storage tanks, their access points marked by concrete covers set into the asphalt. The fuel pumps were arranged in a simple configuration, with clear sightlines from the store windows. Shakira's trained eye noted several details that might be relevant to the leak investigation. The station was built on a gentle slope, with the creek running at the bottom of the grade. Any leaked fuel would naturally flow downhill toward the water. The underground tanks were positioned uphill from the creek, which could explain how petroleum was reaching the water if there was indeed a leak. "Show me where you smelled the petroleum," Shakira said. Jake led her to the back edge of his property, where a small creek ran roughly parallel to the highway. The water was clear and moved at a lazy pace, typical of mountain streams in late fall. But as they approached the bank, Shakira caught the same smell Jake had described. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sharp chemical odor of refined petroleum products. And it was definitely coming from the creek area. Shakira's nose had been trained by years of sniffing for gas leaks, oil spills, and chemical releases on offshore platforms. This smell was petroleum, probably gasoline based on the particular combination of hydrocarbons she could detect. "Jake, do you have a flashlight?" He handed her a heavy-duty LED light, and Shakira knelt beside the creek bank. The smell was stronger closer to the water, and when she shined the light across the surface, she saw something that made her heart skip.
A thin, iridescent film covered a section of the creek about 20 feet wide. It caught the light like an oil slick, creating rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The film was characteristic of petroleum contamination, indicating that hydrocarbons were present in concentrations high enough to form a visible layer on the water surface. "This is bad, Jake. Really bad." "How bad?" Shakira stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "There's definitely fuel in this creek. Based on the size of the slick and the smell intensity, I'd guess you've been losing fuel for weeks, maybe longer." "But where's it going?" "I mean, once it's in the creek." That was exactly what worried Shakira. She'd studied environmental contamination as part of her platform's safety training. Creeks led to rivers, rivers led to reservoirs, and contamination could spread much faster than people realized. "We need to trace this creek. See where it goes, where it connects to other water sources." They spent the next hour following the creek downstream. It wound through several properties, including the back of the elementary school and the residential area where many of Pine Valley's families lived. About a mile from the gas station, the creek joined with a larger stream that eventually fed into the municipal water treatment plant. Shakira felt her stomach tighten. If fuel contamination reached the water treatment facility, it could affect the entire town's water supply. Even small amounts of petroleum products could make water unsafe for drinking, cooking, or bathing. The water treatment plant was a modest facility that served Pine Valley and 2 neighboring communities. It wasn't designed to handle petroleum contamination, and the operators probably wouldn't know how to detect or remove hydrocarbon contamination if it arrived in their intake water. Jake, we need to call the state inspector again. Tell them this is an emergency situation. What if they still won't come out immediately? Then we'll call the State Environmental Protection Office, the County Health Department, and anyone else who will listen. This isn't just about your gas station anymore. This could affect everyone in Pine Valley. But when they called the state inspector's office, they got the same response as before. Someone would be out next week to assess the situation. Budget constraints and scheduling conflicts meant emergency responses were limited to situations involving immediate threats to human life. They don't understand, Jake said after hanging up. Or they don't care. Shakira understood both problems. Government bureaucracy moved slowly, and without visible flames or obvious health impacts, fuel leaks often got classified as non-emergency situations. But her experience told her that by the time visible problems appeared, the contamination would already be much worse. The regulatory system was designed to handle problems after they became serious enough to cause immediate harm. But environmental contamination often worked differently. By the time you could see the effects, the damage was already extensive and much more expensive to fix. "Let me make some other calls," she said. "I still know people in the industry who might be able to help." She spent the afternoon on the phone with former colleagues, environmental consultants, and regulatory contacts. Most were sympathetic, but explained that without official jurisdiction or a formal request from local authorities, there was little they could do immediately. Sarah Chen, the local doctor, stopped by the inn that evening and found Shakira poring over maps and technical manuals. "Jake Murphy said you've been helping him with some kind of problem at the gas station," Sarah said. "Is everything okay?" Shakira hesitated. She didn't want to create unnecessary panic, but Sarah was a medical professional who needed to know about potential health risks in the community. "We think there might be a fuel leak affecting the creek behind Jake's station. It could potentially impact drinking water supplies." Sarah's expression grew serious. "How serious are we talking?" "Potentially very serious. Petroleum contamination can cause a range of health problems, especially with prolonged exposure. We're still trying to determine the extent of the contamination. What should I be watching for in terms of health symptoms? Headaches, nausea, respiratory irritation, fatigue. But Sarah, I don't want to alarm people unnecessarily. We're still investigating the situation." "I understand. But if this is as serious as you think, the community needs to know so they can take precautions." As evening approached, Shakira realized they might be on their own, at least for the next few days. And every day they waited was another day for the contamination to spread further. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. Shakira knocked on Mayor Patricia Williams' door at 7 a.m. sharp. Patricia was a retired banker who had moved to Pine Valley 15 years earlier and somehow found herself running the town when nobody else wanted the job. She was practical, direct, and not easily impressed by dramatic claims. "Shakira, is everything all right at the inn?" "It's not about the inn, Patricia. We have a potential environmental emergency, and I need the town's help to address it." Patricia invited her in, and over coffee in a kitchen that overlooked Pine Valley's main street, Shakira explained everything she'd discovered at Murphy's gas station. She described the missing fuel, the contaminated creek, and the potential threat to the town's water supply. Patricia listened carefully, asking occasional questions about technical details and timelines. As mayor, she'd dealt with various crises over the years: severe weather, budget shortfalls, infrastructure problems, but nothing like this. "You're sure about this?" Patricia asked when Shakira finished. "I've spent 15 years dealing with petroleum safety issues. What I saw yesterday indicates a significant underground leak that's been ongoing for weeks or months. If we don't act quickly, it could affect our entire water system. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. As mayor, she was responsible for the safety and welfare of 847 people, but she also had to balance that responsibility against limited resources and the risk of creating unnecessary panic. What do you think we should do? First, we need to inform the public about the potential water contamination. People should know to use bottled water for drinking and cooking until we can determine the extent of the problem. That's going to cause a panic, Shakira. You know how people react to things like this. Shakira understood the concern. Small communities were particularly vulnerable to panic because everyone knew everyone else, and rumors spread faster than facts. But she'd also seen what happened when communities weren't warned about environmental hazards until it was too late. I know, but the alternative is worse. If petroleum contamination reaches toxic levels in someone's well water and they get sick, that's a lawsuit and a public health crisis the town can't afford. Patricia nodded slowly. What else? We need to stop the leak at its source. That means excavating around Jake's underground tanks to locate the exact point of failure, and we need to start tracking the contamination to see how far it's already spread. The town doesn't have the budget for that kind of work, especially not on an emergency basis. Shakira had anticipated this objection. Pine Valley's annual budget was probably less than what a major environmental remediation project would cost. Small towns were always caught between the need for essential services and the limited tax base to pay for them. I can do most of the initial assessment work myself. I have the training and experience, and I still have contacts who might donate equipment or expertise. You'd be willing to do that? Patricia, I've seen what happens when petroleum leaks get ignored or downplayed. I've watched entire coastal areas get contaminated because someone decided the problem could wait. I won't let that happen to Pine Valley. The conviction in Shakira's voice seemed to persuade the mayor. She'd clearly been hoping that someone with technical expertise would take responsibility for the situation, rather than leaving her to make decisions about problems she didn't fully understand. After another moment of consideration, Patricia picked up her phone. I'm calling an emergency town meeting for tonight. We'll present the situation to the community and let them decide how to proceed. The emergency meeting was held at the elementary school gymnasium, the only space in Pine Valley large enough to accommodate most of the town's residents. By 7 p.m., nearly 300 people had gathered, filling folding chairs and lining the walls. The mood was curious rather than panicked. Most people had no idea why they'd been called together. Mayor Williams opened the meeting with a brief introduction, then turned the microphone over to Shakira. Standing in front of so many neighbors, she felt more nervous than she had during any platform safety briefing. On the platforms, she'd been talking to trained professionals who understood the risks. Here, she was addressing families with children, elderly residents, and people who depended on the local water supply for their daily needs.
3 days ago, Jake Murphy noticed fuel disappearing from his underground storage tanks, she began. Yesterday, we discovered petroleum contamination in the creek behind his station. Based on my experience in the oil industry, I believe we're dealing with a significant underground leak that could threaten our water supply. The reaction was immediate. People turned to each other with worried expressions. Voices rose in concern, and several hands shot up with questions. How serious is this contamination? Asked Dr. Sarah Chen, even though she already knew the basic details. Potentially very serious. Petroleum products can cause cancer, liver damage, and nervous system problems with prolonged exposure. Even small amounts can make water unsafe for drinking. What about our wells? Shouted someone from the back. Are they already contaminated? We don't know yet. That's why we need to act quickly to assess the situation and prevent further spreading. The questions continued for nearly an hour. People wanted to know about their children's safety, their property values, their pets, and their gardens. Shakira answered as honestly as she could, acknowledging uncertainty while emphasizing the need for immediate action. Some residents were skeptical about the severity of the problem. After all, they couldn't see or smell contamination at their homes, and the creek looked normal except for that small area behind the gas station. Others were more concerned about the potential costs of cleanup work and who would be responsible for paying. "My family's been drinking well water for 20 years, said Bill Henderson, an elderly man who lived downstream from the gas station. "Are you saying that water might be poisoned?" "I'm saying we need to test it to make sure it's safe," Shakira replied. "Until we know for certain, bottled water is the safest option for drinking and cooking." Finally, Mayor Williams called for a vote. Shakira has volunteered to lead an emergency assessment of the contamination situation. She's asking for the town's permission to investigate the leak source and track contamination levels. All in favor? Nearly every hand in the room went up. Opposed? 3 hands rose, belonging to people who were concerned about potential costs and disruption. Motion carries. Shakira, the town authorizes you to proceed with your investigation. We'll reconvene in 3 days to hear your findings. As people filed out of the gymnasium, many stopped to thank Shakira or offer assistance. Jake Murphy looked relieved to finally have support. Dr. Chen volunteered to help monitor potential health effects. Even some of the teenagers offered to help with manual labor. But as Shakira walked back to the inn that night, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She just volunteered to take on a complex environmental emergency with limited resources and no official authority. If she was wrong about the severity of the situation, she'd look foolish. If she was right but couldn't solve the problem, people could get sick or lose their homes. The decision reminded her of moments on the oil platforms when she'd had to choose between following standard procedures and taking immediate action to prevent potential disasters. Sometimes the safe choice was also the wrong choice, and sometimes the right choice involved accepting personal risk and responsibility. Either way, there was no turning back now. Shakira's phone rang at 5:30 a.m. Carlos Rodriguez was calling from Texas, and his voice carried the urgency she remembered from their platform days. "I've been thinking about your situation all night," he said without preamble. "I made some calls, and I think I can help you." "I'm listening." "First, I'm sending you a portable hydrocarbon detector. It should arrive tomorrow morning. Second, I found a drilling contractor in Denver who owes me a favor. He's agreed to bring a soil sampling rig to Pine Valley at cost." Shakira felt a surge of gratitude. Professional-grade equipment would make her investigation much more accurate and credible. Without proper testing equipment, she'd been relying on visual observations and her nose, methods that were useful but wouldn't provide the detailed data needed for official reports. "Carlos, that's incredible. But I have to ask, why are you going to this much trouble?" There was a pause before he answered. "Because 15 years ago, you saved my life during that platform fire in the Gulf. I never properly thanked you for that." The memory hit Shakira like a physical blow. Hurricane Patricia had been threatening the Gulf Coast, and most personnel had been evacuated from Platform 7. But a skeleton crew had remained to secure equipment and monitor for problems. When an electrical fire broke out in the main control room, Carlos had been trapped by fallen cables and toxic smoke. Shakira had crawled through burning equipment compartments to reach him, then dragged him to safety through ventilation shafts that were filling with smoke. She'd never considered it particularly heroic, just part of the job. But Carlos had needed 3 weeks in the hospital to recover from smoke inhalation. "You don't owe me anything, Carlos. We were a team." "Maybe. But I'm sending the equipment anyway. And Shakira, be careful. Underground fuel leaks can be unpredictable." The warning was more serious than Carlos's usual professional caution. He'd seen environmental contamination situations turn dangerous with little warning, and his concern reminded Shakira that she was dealing with potentially volatile chemicals in an uncontrolled environment. The rest of the morning was spent organizing her investigation. Jake had given her full access to his station and property. Mayor Williams had provided a letter authorizing her to work on behalf of the town, and Dr. Chen had agreed to collect water samples from residential wells for testing. Shakira's first priority was mapping the underground infrastructure around Murphy's gas station. She needed to understand how the fuel storage system was configured, where pipes and cables ran, and what might have caused a tank or line to fail. Jake's father had built the station in 1982, which meant the underground tanks were nearly 40 years old. The fuel lines connecting the tanks to the pumps had been replaced once, in 1998, but the tanks themselves were original equipment. Dad always said those tanks were built to last forever, Jake explained as they stood over the access covers. But I guess forever isn't as long as it used to be. Using blueprints from the county planning office, Shakira traced the layout of the underground system. Two 10,000-gallon fiberglass tanks were buried 8 feet below the surface, connected to the pumps by insulated steel pipes. The system included leak detection sensors, but Jake admitted they hadn't been tested recently. When was the last time you had the system inspected? State inspector came by 2 years ago. Said everything looked fine, but he didn't do any serious testing. Just checked the paperwork and looked at the pumps. That wasn't uncommon in rural areas, where regulatory oversight was often limited by budget constraints and personnel shortages. But it meant that problems could develop and go unnoticed for extended periods. The hydrocarbon detector arrived the next morning, along with soil sampling equipment and detailed instructions from Carlos. Shakira spent an hour familiarizing herself with the device, then began systematic testing around the gas station property. The detector measured hydrocarbon concentrations in parts per million, providing real-time readings as she moved across different areas. Background levels in clean soil typically registered below 10 parts per million. Near the station's fuel pumps, readings were around 25 parts per million, which was normal for an active petroleum facility. But when she approached the creek area where they'd first noticed the petroleum smell, the detector's alarm began beeping. Readings jumped to over 200 parts per million, then continued climbing as she moved closer to the water. Jake, come look at this. He hurried over as Shakira held the detector near the creek bank. The digital display showed 347 parts per million and climbing. What does that number mean? It means there's a massive amount of petroleum contamination in this soil. This isn't a small leak, Jake. This is a major failure somewhere in your underground system. The soil sampling revealed even more troubling information. Core samples taken at various depths showed hydrocarbon contamination extending down to the water table level. The contamination plume was roughly football field-sized, centered between the gas station and the creek. Each soil sample told part of the story. Near the surface, contamination levels were moderate, suggesting recent leakage, but deeper samples showed much higher concentrations, indicating that fuel had been leaking for months or possibly years. The pattern suggested that one or both of the underground tanks had developed multiple breach points. But the most disturbing discovery came when Shakira tested soil samples from the elementary school playground, located 200 yards downstream from the gas station. The detector registered 89 parts per million. Jake, we need to call the school principal immediately. They need to keep kids away from the playground area until we can determine if it's safe. The conversation with Principal Martinez was difficult. Closing the playground would require explanations to parents, alternative arrangements for recess activities, and notifications to the school district administration. But when Shakira showed him the hydrocarbon readings, he agreed to implement immediate precautions. How long before we know if the children have been exposed to dangerous levels? He asked. That depends on how long the contamination has been spreading and whether any of it has reached the school's water supply. Dr. Chen is already testing well water throughout the area, and we should have results tomorrow. The school's water supply came from the same aquifer that served most of Pine Valley, which meant that contamination in one area could potentially affect the entire community. The thought of children drinking contaminated water made Shakira's stomach clench with anxiety. That evening, Shakira compiled her findings into a preliminary report for Mayor Williams and the town council. The situation was worse than she'd initially suspected, but not yet at catastrophic levels. However, if the source of the leak wasn't identified and stopped soon, the contamination could spread much further. She was finishing the report when her phone rang. It was Dr. Chen, and her voice was tense. "Shakira, I've got preliminary results from the water testing. You're not going to like what I found." "There's something else, Doctor," Chen continued. "I've been researching health effects of petroleum exposure, and I'm concerned about symptoms I might have overlooked. Several residents have mentioned headaches, nausea, and fatigue over the past few weeks. I attributed it to seasonal changes, but now I'm wondering if we're already seeing early health impacts." That night, Shakira barely slept. She kept running through scenarios in her mind, trying to anticipate how the situation might develop and what steps would be needed to protect the community. Her experience with platform emergencies had taught her that contamination problems usually got worse before they got better, and time was always the most critical factor. The memory of Platform Delta haunted her thoughts. A small fuel leak had gone undetected for weeks, contaminating a large area of ocean water before being discovered. The cleanup had taken months and cost millions of dollars, but the environmental damage had been permanent. Some marine life in the area had never recovered. The next morning brought both good news and bad news. The good news was that Carlos had convinced the drilling contractor to move up his schedule and arrive that afternoon. The bad news came in a phone call from the State Environmental Office. "Miss Martinez, this is Rebecca Foster from State Environmental Protection. I understand you've been conducting unauthorized testing in Pine Valley." Shakira felt a familiar surge of frustration with bureaucratic obstacles. She'd dealt with similar interference during her platform career, when officials more concerned with procedures than problems had delayed critical safety work. "I've been conducting emergency testing at the request of the town mayor. We have a confirmed petroleum leak affecting drinking water supplies. I'm sure you believe that, but you're not certified to conduct official environmental assessments in Colorado. Any testing you've done can't be used for regulatory purposes. Miss Foster, people are drinking contaminated water right now. Are you telling me we should ignore that because of paperwork issues? I'm telling you that proper procedures exist for good reasons. I have an inspector scheduled to visit Pine Valley next Monday. Until then, please refrain from further unauthorized testing." Shakira hung up the phone before she said something she might regret. In her platform days, she dealt with similar bureaucratic roadblocks, usually while equipment was failing or storms were approaching. The key was to focus on what needed to be done, rather than what officials preferred to delay. The drilling contractor, a weathered man named Bob Stevens, arrived at 2 p.m. with a truck-mounted soil auger and decades of experience in environmental remediation. He listened carefully as Shakira explained the situation, occasionally nodding or asking technical questions. "You're right about the severity," he said after reviewing her test results. "This looks like a major tank failure, probably multiple breach points. We need to locate the exact source before we can design a remediation plan." Bob had handled similar situations across Colorado and neighboring states. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of years spent dealing with environmental emergencies, from leaking underground storage tanks to industrial chemical spills. His presence gave Shakira confidence that they could handle the technical aspects of the problem. They spent the afternoon drilling test holes around the gas station property, collecting soil samples at various depths and locations. The pattern that emerged confirmed Shakira's worst suspicions. The contamination wasn't coming from a single point source. Instead, it appeared that one of Jake's underground tanks had developed multiple cracks or holes, allowing fuel to leak into the surrounding soil over an extended period. "How long do you think this has been going on?" Jake asked as they examined the latest soil samples. Bob Stevens studied the contamination patterns on a makeshift map they'd drawn on plywood. Based on the spread pattern and concentration levels, I'd estimate at least 6 months, possibly longer. You've been losing fuel gradually, so the losses weren't immediately obvious. 6 months, Jake repeated, his face pale. All that time, petroleum was leaking into the creek, and I had no idea. Shakira placed a hand on his shoulder. This isn't your fault, Jake. Underground tank failures are often impossible to detect without specialized equipment. The important thing now is stopping the leak and cleaning up the contamination. But stopping the leak would require excavating around the underground tanks to locate and repair the damage. That meant shutting down the gas station, potentially for weeks. For Pine Valley, losing its only fuel source would create significant hardships for residents who depended on their cars for work, shopping, and medical appointments. There might be another option, Bob Stevens said, studying the contamination map. If we can isolate the leak source and install temporary pumping systems, we might be able to contain the contamination while keeping the station operational. It was a complex solution that would require specialized equipment and constant monitoring, but it could buy them time to develop a comprehensive cleanup plan while maintaining essential services for the community. The temporary containment approach would involve installing monitoring wells around the contaminated area, using pumps to extract contaminated groundwater, and creating hydraulic barriers to prevent further spreading. It was technically challenging but feasible with the right equipment and expertise. That evening, Shakira called another town meeting to update residents on the investigation findings and discuss response options. The elementary school gymnasium was even more crowded than before, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. The mood was tense. Word had spread about the contaminated wells, and families were worried about their health, their property values, and their water supplies. Some people were angry about the delayed government response. Others were frustrated with the disruption to their daily routines. The good news, Shakira began, is that we've identified the source of the contamination and we have a plan to stop it from spreading further. The bad news is that cleanup will take months, possibly years, and it's going to be expensive. Who's going to pay for all this? Shouted someone from the middle of the crowd. It was a reasonable question that Shakira couldn't fully answer. Environmental cleanup costs often reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, well beyond what a small business like Jake's gas station could afford. State and federal programs existed to help with cleanup costs, but accessing those programs required navigating complex bureaucratic processes. Jake Murphy stood up slowly, his face drawn with worry and exhaustion. I want everyone to know that I'll do whatever it takes to fix this problem. My insurance might cover some of the costs, and I'm willing to mortgage my house if necessary. That's not right, called out Elena Vasquez, a single mother who worked at the school. This isn't just your responsibility, Jake. We're all in this together. We're going to have to work together on funding, Mayor Williams said, taking the microphone. That might mean emergency loans, federal assistance programs, or temporary tax assessments. But our first priority has to be protecting public health. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, with heated discussions about responsibility, costs, and timelines. But in the end, the community reached a consensus. The leak had to be stopped immediately, regardless of financial concerns. As people filed out of the gymnasium, many stopped to thank Shakira for her efforts or offer additional help. But she also overheard conversations that worried her, talk about lawsuits, property damage claims, and fears about long-term health effects. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose well water had tested positive for contamination, approached Shakira with tears in her eyes. My husband and I have been drinking that water for 5 years since we moved here. Are we going to get sick? The contamination levels aren't immediately dangerous, Shakira reassured her, but Dr. Chen will be monitoring your health closely, and we're going to get you clean water supplies right away. The technical aspects of containing the leak would be challenging, but manageable. the social and economic aspects might prove much more difficult to address. The next few days blurred together in a constant cycle of testing, planning, and coordination. Bob Stevens had brought in additional equipment and crew members to begin emergency containment work. Shakira found herself serving as a translator between the technical team and the community, explaining complex environmental issues in terms that ordinary residents could understand. The containment plan involved installing a series of monitoring wells around the gas station property to track contamination levels and prevent further spreading. Temporary pumping systems would extract contaminated groundwater for treatment, while injection wells would create a hydraulic barrier to keep petroleum from reaching clean areas. Think of it like building a dam underground, Shakira explained to a group of concerned residents. We're creating a barrier that will contain the contamination while we work on permanent cleanup. But the work was proceeding more slowly than anyone had hoped. Rocky soil conditions made drilling difficult, and equipment breakdowns caused frequent delays. Meanwhile, petroleum contamination continued spreading at an estimated rate of 10 feet per day. Dr. Chen was tracking potential health impacts among residents in the affected area. So far, no one had developed serious symptoms, but several families reported persistent headaches, fatigue, and respiratory irritation that could be related to petroleum exposure. We're still within manageable limits, she told Shakira during a late-night consultation. But if contamination levels increase significantly, we might need to recommend temporary evacuation for the most vulnerable residents. The possibility of evacuation added another layer of urgency to the containment efforts. Pine Valley didn't have temporary housing facilities for displaced families, and the nearest motels were 30 miles away. Evacuation would mean separating people from their homes, jobs, and support networks during an already stressful time. On Thursday morning, Shakira received a phone call that changed everything. Miss Martinez, this is Tom Brady from the National Pipeline Administration. We've been monitoring your situation in Pine Valley, and we think there might be a complication you're not aware of. Shakira felt a familiar chill of apprehension. In her experience, federal agencies didn't call with good news. What kind of complication? According to our records, there's a natural gas pipeline that runs approximately 200 yards north of Murphy's gas station. If petroleum contamination reaches that pipeline corridor, it could create a serious explosion hazard. The words hit Shakira like a physical blow. Natural gas pipelines were designed with multiple safety systems, but petroleum contamination could interfere with those systems or create unexpected ignition sources. If contaminated soil came into contact with pipeline equipment, the results could be catastrophic. How close is the contamination to the pipeline corridor? Based on the information you've provided to state agencies, we estimate you have 48 to 72 hours before contamination reaches the pipeline right-of-way. After that, we'll need to consider shutting down the pipeline until the area can be secured. Shutting down the natural gas pipeline would affect thousands of customers across 3 counties. Homes, businesses, and essential services would lose heating and cooking gas during what was forecasted to be the coldest week of the fall season.
Shakira thanked Tom Brady for the information, then immediately called Bob Stevens and Mayor Williams. The containment timeline had just accelerated from weeks to hours. We need to mobilize every available resource, she told the emergency meeting that convened 30 minutes later. This is no longer just about protecting Pine Valley's water supply. If we don't contain this contamination immediately, we could be looking at a regional disaster. Bob Stevens was already revising his plans, focusing all efforts on the area between the gas station and the pipeline corridor. We'll need to work around the clock and bring in additional crews. It's going to be expensive, but it's the only way to prevent a much larger problem. Mayor Williams was making rapid calculations on a notepad, her face growing paler with each number. Bob, what's this emergency response going to cost? With round-the-clock crews and emergency equipment rental, We're looking at about $150,000 for the immediate containment work. That doesn't include long-term cleanup, which could run 10 times that amount. The number hung in the air like smoke. Pine Valley's entire annual budget was less than $300,000. There was no way the town could afford emergency containment costs without outside help. "I'm calling the governor's office," Mayor Williams said finally. "This has moved beyond local capacity. We need state emergency assistance." While the mayor worked the phones, Shakira coordinated with Bob Stevens to organize the emergency containment effort. They would need to excavate a barrier trench between the contamination plume and the pipeline corridor, install temporary pumping systems, and monitor soil conditions continuously. "The good news," Bob explained to the assembled crew, "is that we only need to buy time for a permanent solution. The bad news is that we have less than 2 days to do work that normally takes 2 weeks." The crews began arriving that afternoon: environmental contractors, excavation specialists, and monitoring technicians from across Colorado and neighboring states. Bob Stevens had called in favors and emergency contracts to assemble the largest environmental response team Pine Valley had ever seen. Shakira found herself coordinating between multiple groups of specialists, each focused on different aspects of the containment effort. Her experience managing complex platform operations proved invaluable as she tracked progress, identified bottlenecks, and solved problems that arose hourly. "Shakira, we've hit bedrock in Sector 3, reported Maria Santos, the excavation foreman. "The barrier trench can't go any deeper without blasting, and that could destabilize the pipeline. Can we redirect around the bedrock area?" "Maybe, but it would add 12 hours to the timeline and leave a potential gap in the containment system." These were the kinds of decisions Shakira had made dozens of times on oil platforms, balancing imperfect options under extreme time pressure while lives and property hung in the balance. But this time, the consequences extended far beyond her immediate crew.
"Let's run parallel trenches on either side of the bedrock," she decided. "We'll lose some efficiency, but we'll maintain containment integrity." The work continued through the night under portable floodlights. Shakira moved between work sites, checking progress and solving problems as they arose. At 3 a.m., she was reviewing soil contamination maps when her phone rang. It was Carlos Rodriguez, calling from Texas. "I've been following your situation through industry contacts. How are you holding up?" "Tired, worried, but managing. We're making progress on the containment work." "That's good to hear." "Listen, I've got some potentially helpful news. I found a federal emergency fund that might cover your cleanup costs. It's designed specifically for situations like yours. Petroleum contamination threatening critical infrastructure." Shakira felt a surge of hope. What would we need to do to qualify? Detailed documentation of the contamination, proof of the threat to the pipeline, and certification that local resources are insufficient. Based on what you've told me, Pine Valley should easily qualify. "Carlos, that could save the town from bankruptcy. There's one catch. The application process normally takes months, but there's an emergency provision that could accelerate approval to a few days. The problem is, you need a certified environmental consultant to submit the application." Shakira understood immediately. As a former oil platform safety inspector, she had the technical knowledge to assess the situation, but she didn't have the official credentials required for federal paperwork. "I might have a solution for that too," Carlos continued. "Remember Janet Morrison from Platform 5? She's got her own environmental consulting firm now, and she owes you a favor from that helicopter rescue in 2003.
The memory came flooding back. Hurricane Isabel had caught Platform 5 during a routine inspection, and Janet had been injured when the helicopter deck was damaged by debris. Shakira had rigged an emergency extraction system that allowed the helicopter to evacuate Janet and 2 other injured workers. Think she'd be willing to help Pine Valley? Already asked her. She's driving up from Denver tonight and should be there by morning. She'll handle the federal application while you focus on the containment work. After hanging up, Shakira allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. If the federal funding came through, Pine Valley might survive this crisis without financial ruin. But first, they had to prevent the immediate disaster.
Dawn brought both progress and new challenges. The barrier trenches were 60% complete, and soil contamination levels had stabilized in most areas. But the petroleum plume was still advancing toward the pipeline corridor, and weather forecasts predicted heavy rain that could accelerate groundwater movement. Janet Morrison arrived at 6 a.m., driving a pickup truck loaded with testing equipment and paperwork. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the efficient manner of someone accustomed to emergency situations. "Shakira Martinez," she said, extending a firm handshake. "Carlos told me you were stirring up trouble again." "Same old me." "Thanks for coming, Janet. We really need the help." They spent an hour touring the contamination site while Janet collected soil and water samples for her federal application. Her assessment confirmed Shakira's findings, but added technical details that would strengthen the emergency funding request. "This is definitely a major release," Janet said, examining the latest test results. "The contamination levels justify emergency federal intervention, and the threat to critical infrastructure makes it a regional concern." "How long before we know about funding approval?" "If I submit the application this morning and everything goes smoothly, we could have an answer by tomorrow afternoon. But federal bureaucracy isn't known for speed, even in emergencies." Meanwhile, the containment work was entering its most critical phase. The barrier trenches were nearly complete, but installing the pumping systems required precise coordination to avoid disturbing contaminated soil. Shakira was reviewing pump placement diagrams when her radio crackled with an urgent message from Maria Santos. "Shakira, we've got a problem in Sector 2. The excavation hit a utility line, and we're seeing some kind of gas leak." She dropped everything and ran toward Sector 2, her heart pounding. Gas leaks near petroleum contamination created exactly the kind of explosion hazard they were trying to prevent. The excavation crew had stopped work and moved away from the dig site. A strong smell of natural gas hung in the air, and Shakira could hear the distinctive hissing sound of pressurized gas escaping from a damaged line. "How bad is the damage?" she asked Maria. "Looks like we nicked a service line feeding gas to the elementary school. It's not the main pipeline, but it's under pressure and it's leaking fast." Bob Stevens arrived moments later with gas detection equipment. His readings confirmed what they could already smell. Natural gas concentrations were approaching dangerous levels. "We need to evacuate the area immediately," he said. "And we need the gas company out here to shut off this line before it gets worse." The evacuation order affected the elementary school, several nearby homes, and the entire contamination containment crew. Work stopped completely while emergency responders established a safety perimeter and contacted the gas utility company. Principal Martinez handled the school evacuation with calm efficiency, moving 200 children to the community center while maintaining the appearance of a routine drill. But Shakira could see the worry in his eyes as he watched gas company crews working to shut off the damaged line. "How long before it's safe to resume work?" he asked. "At least several hours, possibly longer if the line damage is extensive." Every hour of delay meant more petroleum contamination spreading toward the main pipeline. They were in a race against time, and they just lost precious hours to an unexpected setback. The gas leak was finally controlled by late afternoon, but the delay had disrupted the carefully coordinated containment timeline. Some crew members had gone home during the evacuation, and it took time to reassemble the full team. "We're behind schedule, but not fatally behind," Bob Stevens reported as work resumed. "If we can maintain progress through the night, we should complete the barrier system before contamination reaches the pipeline corridor." But that night brought another challenge. The predicted rain arrived as a steady downpour that turned the work sites into muddy, slippery obstacles. Excavation became more difficult, equipment got stuck, and safety concerns multiplied in the darkness and wet conditions. Shakira found herself making difficult decisions about acceptable risk levels. Continuing work in dangerous conditions could lead to accidents, but stopping work could allow contamination to reach the pipeline with catastrophic consequences. "We keep going," she decided after consulting with the crew supervisors. "But we implement additional safety protocols and rotate crews more frequently to manage fatigue." The work continued through the rain and darkness. Shakira moved between work sites, monitoring progress and ensuring safety procedures were followed. Her clothes were soaked, her boots were caked with mud, and exhaustion was becoming a real factor in her decision-making. At 2 a.m., Janet Morrison brought coffee and an update on the federal funding application. "I submitted the paperwork this afternoon, and I've been working contacts in Washington to expedite the review process. The good news is that your situation meets all the criteria for emergency assistance. The bad news is that the approval process involves multiple agencies, and coordination takes time." How much time? Best case scenario, we get approval tomorrow evening. Worst case, it could be early next week. Either way, Pine Valley would need to find emergency funding to cover the immediate containment costs. The town was already committed to expenses that exceeded its entire annual budget. As dawn approached on what Shakira hoped would be the final day of emergency containment work, she allowed herself to think about what would happen after the immediate crisis was resolved. Even if they successfully prevented contamination from reaching the pipeline, the long-term cleanup would take months or years. Pine Valley would be dealing with this situation long after the emergency crews had gone home. But first, they had to get through the next 24 hours. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise, and the work crews were able to make significant progress on the remaining barrier installations. By noon, the containment system was 90% complete, and soil testing showed that contamination advancement had slowed dramatically. "We might actually pull this off," Bob Stevens told Shakira as they reviewed the latest monitoring data. "If we can maintain current progress for another 6 hours, the containment system should be fully operational." But Shakira had learned not to celebrate until the job was completely finished. Too many platform operations had gone wrong in the final stages when people got tired or overconfident. Chapter 9. The Final Push. Friday morning brought clearing skies and the first good news in days. Overnight progress had been better than expected, and the barrier system was 85% complete. More importantly, soil testing showed that contamination advancement had slowed significantly. "We might actually pull this off," Bob Stevens told Shakira as they reviewed the latest monitoring data. "If we can maintain current progress for another 8 hours, the containment system should be fully operational." But Shakira had learned not to celebrate until the job was completely finished. Too many platform operations had gone wrong in the final stages when people got tired or overconfident. "Let's focus on the work still ahead," she said. "What do we need to finish the system?" The remaining tasks were complex, but manageable. Final pump installations, connection of monitoring equipment, and testing of the complete containment system. Each step required precise coordination between multiple crews. Shakira was supervising pump installation when Mayor Williams approached with her phone in hand. "I just got off the phone with the governor's office. They're sending a state environmental team to assess our situation and coordinate with federal agencies." "When will they arrive?" "This afternoon. And Shakira, they specifically asked to meet with you. Apparently, word has spread about your background and your role in organizing the emergency response." The prospect of dealing with state officials made Shakira nervous. She'd been operating with local authority and industry connections, but state involvement meant official oversight and potential criticism of her methods. "What should I tell them?" "The truth. You identified a serious environmental threat, organized an effective response, and probably prevented a regional disaster. I think they're coming to thank you, not criticize you." The pump installation proceeded smoothly through the morning. By noon, all major components of the containment system were in place and ready for testing. The moment of truth had arrived. Bob Stevens activated the system remotely from a control panel in his truck. Pumps hummed to life, monitoring equipment began collecting data, and everyone watched the digital displays that would indicate whether the containment system was working. For several minutes, the readings fluctuated as the system stabilized. Then, gradually, the numbers began showing what they'd hoped to see, decreasing contamination levels in the critical monitoring wells. "It's working," Janet Morrison announced, reading from her own testing equipment. "Contamination advancement has stopped, and we're seeing active extraction in the pump wells." A cheer went up from the assembled crews. After 4 days of intensive work under extreme pressure, they had successfully contained the petroleum leak and prevented contamination from reaching the natural gas pipeline. But the celebration was brief. Everyone understood that containment was just the first step in a much longer cleanup process. The state environmental team arrived at 3 p.m. in a convoy of official vehicles. The team leader, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, was a senior environmental scientist with decades of experience in contamination assessment and cleanup. She spent 2 hours touring the site, reviewing documentation, and interviewing key participants in the emergency response. Her questions were detailed and professional, focusing on technical aspects of the contamination and containment efforts. "Miss Martinez," she said when they finished the site tour, "I have to say that this is one of the most effective emergency responses I've seen in my career. Your assessment was accurate, your containment strategy was sound, and your coordination was excellent. Thank you, but it was a team effort." Bob Stevens and his crews did the heavy lifting, and Janet Morrison handled the regulatory aspects. Nevertheless, your role was critical. Without your initial recognition of the problem and your leadership in organizing the response, this situation could have become much worse. Dr. Warren's official report would later describe the Pine Valley response as a model for community-based environmental emergency management. But more immediately, her positive assessment would strengthen the federal funding application and provide official validation of the cleanup approach. That evening, Janet Morrison received the call they'd all been waiting for. "Federal emergency funding has been approved," she announced to the assembled group at Jake's gas station. "Pine Valley will receive full reimbursement for contamination containment and cleanup costs." The relief was overwhelming. Jake Murphy actually sat down heavily on a plastic crate, as if his legs had given out. Mayor Williams wiped tears from her eyes. Several crew members applauded. "What happens next?" asked Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring potential health impacts throughout the crisis. "Long-term cleanup begins immediately, Doctor," Warren explained. "We'll be installing permanent treatment systems, conducting ongoing monitoring, and gradually removing contaminated soil. The process will take 18 to 24 months, but it should return the area to clean conditions." "And the gas station?" Jake asked quietly. "You'll be able to reopen once we've repaired the underground tanks and confirmed that all systems are safe. Probably within 2 weeks." As the official meeting concluded and people began heading home, Shakira found herself standing alone beside the creek where she'd first detected petroleum contamination. The water was running clear again, and the smell that had alerted her to the problem was gone. Bob Stevens approached and stood beside her. "You did good work here, Shakira. You should be proud. I'm mostly relieved. This could have been much worse. But it wasn't, because you recognized the problem and took action. A lot of people would have ignored the signs or assumed someone else would handle it." Shakira thought about that as she walked back to the Mountain View Inn. She'd come to Pine Valley to escape the constant pressure of safety concerns and emergency responses. But when crisis arrived anyway, she'd found herself drawing on the same skills and instincts that had guided her through 15 years of platform work. Maybe there was no real escape from responsibility. Maybe the skills that made someone good at handling emergencies also made it impossible to ignore problems when they appeared. Chapter 10. Aftermath and New Beginnings. 3 weeks later, Shakira was back at her usual routine, checking guests into the Mountain View Inn and answering phones. The emergency response equipment was gone, the work crews had departed, and Pine Valley looked much the same as it had before the crisis. But some things had changed permanently. Jake's gas station was open again, with new underground tanks and state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. Business was better than ever, as people went out of their way to support the local business that had been at the center of the community's environmental crisis. The elementary school had installed new playground equipment, funded by donations from environmental organizations that had heard about the contamination threat. Principal Martinez had used the crisis as a teaching opportunity, and students were now more knowledgeable about environmental protection than many adults. Dr. Chen had established a long-term health monitoring program for residents who had been exposed to contamination. So far, all test results were normal, but the program would continue for several years to ensure that no health impacts developed. Most significantly, Pine Valley had developed new emergency response procedures and equipment, funded by the federal grant program. The town was now better prepared for future environmental emergencies than most communities 10 times its size. Shakira had been officially appointed as Pine Valley's Emergency Response Coordinator, a new position created by the town council. It was a part-time role that she could manage alongside her inn duties, but it gave her formal authority to investigate potential environmental threats and coordinate with state and federal agencies. "You've become something of a local celebrity," Mayor Williams told her during a quiet moment at the inn. "People are calling you the woman who saved Pine Valley." "That's an exaggeration." "I just did what needed to be done." "Maybe, but not everyone would have had the knowledge or courage to take on that kind of responsibility. The town owes you a debt of gratitude." On a quiet Sunday evening in late November, Shakira received a phone call that brought the situation full circle. It was Carlos Rodriguez, calling from Texas. "I heard the final cleanup report was approved," he said. "Congratulations on a successful operation." "Thanks for all your help, Carlos. We couldn't have done it without the equipment and expertise you provided." "Actually, I'm calling about something else. There's a situation developing in a small town in New Mexico. Potential chemical contamination near a school. The State Environmental Office is looking for someone with experience in community-based emergency response." Shakira felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. "They want me to consult on the situation? More than that. They want you to lead the assessment and cleanup coordination. It would be a 6-month assignment, full-time, with federal funding."
Carlos, I have responsibilities here in Pine Valley, the inn, my emergency coordinator position. I understand, but Shakira, you've developed skills and experience that could help a lot of communities deal with environmental threats. This could be the beginning of a new career. After hanging up, Shakira sat in her small apartment above the inn, looking out at the quiet streets of Pine Valley. She'd found peace here, built relationships, and established a new life far from the dangers of offshore oil platforms. But the crisis of the past month had reminded her of something important. Her technical knowledge and emergency response skills weren't just professional qualifications. They were tools that could protect people and communities from serious harm. The next morning, she called a meeting with Mayor Williams and the town council. "I've been offered an opportunity to help with environmental emergencies in other communities," she explained. "It would mean leaving Pine Valley for extended periods, but I think it might be important work." Mayor Williams nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" 6 months initially, but it could lead to similar assignments in other locations. I'd essentially be consulting on community-based environmental emergency response. "That sounds like exactly the kind of work you're meant to do," said Councilmember David Torres. "Pine Valley will always be here when you're ready to come back." The decision wasn't easy, but ultimately, it felt right. Shakira had spent 15 years learning how to prevent and respond to environmental disasters. The Pine Valley situation had shown her that those skills could be applied beyond the oil industry to help ordinary communities protect themselves from extraordinary threats. 3 months later, she was standing in another small town, in another state, looking at another potential environmental crisis. But this time, she wasn't a newcomer trying to escape her past. She was a professional responding to a community's call for help. The work was challenging, sometimes dangerous, and often frustrating. But it was also meaningful in a way that her previous career had never quite achieved. Instead of protecting corporate assets and industry workers, she was helping ordinary families keep their children safe and their communities healthy. As she set up her equipment and began testing soil samples in New Mexico, Shakira thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as a safety inspector trying to prevent industrial accidents. She'd become something more: a guardian of communities, a protector of families, a bridge between technical expertise and human need.
The job would involve developing emergency response protocols, training local officials, and coordinating rapid response to environmental crises. It was exactly the kind of work Shakira had been doing independently, but with official support and resources. The position would be based in Denver, but you'd travel extensively to small towns throughout the region, Doctor. Warren continued. We're thinking about 60% travel, 40% office work, and the salary would be competitive with private consulting rates. The offer was tempting, but Shakira had concerns about working within a government bureaucracy. Her experience with state officials during the Pine Valley crisis had shown her both the benefits and limitations of official oversight. What kind of authority would I have in emergency situations? I've seen how slowly government agencies can move when communities need immediate help. That's exactly why we're creating this position. You'd have pre-authorized emergency response capabilities, including the ability to mobilize equipment and personnel without waiting for approval. The idea is to prevent small problems from becoming major disasters. Shakira asked for time to consider the offer, and Dr. Warren agreed to wait 2 weeks for her decision. During that time, she consulted with everyone who had been part of her journey: Carlos Rodriguez, Janet Morrison, Bob Stevens, and the leadership of Pine Valley. It sounds like the perfect job for you, Tom Bradley told her. You could help communities all over the region, not just when crises happen, but before they develop. Mayor Williams agreed. Pine Valley will always be here for you, and now you'll have the resources to help other towns avoid what we went through. The decision became clear when Shakira received a call from a small town in Utah. A mining company had abandoned operations there, leaving behind contaminated settling ponds that were threatening the local water supply. The state environmental office had been contacted, but they were months behind on inspections and couldn't provide immediate assistance. We heard about what you did in Pine Valley, said the caller, who identified herself as the town's volunteer fire chief. We don't have anyone here who knows about this kind of problem, and we can't afford to hire consultants. Would you be willing to help? Shakira realized that she was already doing the work Dr. Warren had described, but without official support or resources. Taking the state position would allow her to help more communities more effectively.
I'll take the job, she told Dr. Warren, but I have one condition. I want to maintain my connection to Pine Valley and use it as a model for community-based emergency response. That's exactly what we had in mind. Pine Valley could serve as a training site for other communities. 2 years later, Shakira's work had taken her to 37 communities across Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. She'd investigated chemical spills, underground storage tank failures, industrial contamination, and agricultural pollution. Her reputation had grown to the point where communities specifically requested her involvement, and other states were developing similar programs based on her work.
But she always returned to Pine Valley between assignments. The Mountain View Inn remained her home base, and Tom Bradley had formalized their arrangement by making her a part owner of the business. The inn now served as an unofficial training center for environmental emergency response, hosting workshops for small-town officials and emergency responders. The town had thrived since the petroleum contamination crisis. The federal cleanup had been completed successfully, with all monitoring wells showing clean results for over a year. Jake's gas station had become a model for environmental safety, with advanced leak detection systems and regular inspections that other fuel retailers studied and copied. More importantly, Pine Valley had developed a culture of environmental awareness and community preparedness that served as an example for other small towns. Students from the elementary school regularly won regional science fairs with projects related to environmental protection. The town's emergency response capabilities had been tested several times with minor incidents, and each time the community had responded quickly and effectively. On a warm spring evening, Shakira was sitting on the inn's front porch when a familiar pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Carlos Rodriguez stepped out, looking exactly as she remembered him from their platform days, but with more gray in his hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "Thought I'd stop by and see how the famous environmental consultant is doing," he said with a grin. "Carlos, what brings you to Colorado?" "Actually, I'm thinking about making a career change myself. The oil industry is evolving, and there's increasing demand for environmental safety consulting. I was hoping you might have some advice about transitioning to community-based work." They talked late into the evening about the challenges and rewards of environmental emergency response. Carlos was particularly interested in the community coordination aspects, how to build trust with local residents, how to navigate local politics, and how to communicate complex technical information in understandable terms. "The technical work is just the beginning," Shakira explained. "The real challenge is helping people understand what's happening and what needs to be done. Every community is different, with different priorities and concerns." "Any regrets about leaving the platform work?" Shakira considered the question carefully. "No regrets. The platform work was important, but this feels more meaningful. When I prevent a contamination problem in a small town, I'm protecting families, children, entire communities. The impact is more personal." As Carlos prepared to leave the next morning, he handed Shakira a business card. "I'm starting my own environmental consulting firm. If you ever want to partner for larger projects, give me a call." Shakira looked at the card. Rodriguez Environmental Solutions, Community-Focused Emergency Response. It was exactly the kind of partnership that could expand their ability to help communities deal with environmental threats. "I'll definitely keep this in mind," she said. "There are more communities out there that need help than I can handle alone." That afternoon, Shakira received a call from the EPA regional office. A cluster of small towns in Arizona was dealing with groundwater contamination from an abandoned mining operation. The situation was complex, affecting multiple communities with different needs and resources. "We'd like you to lead the assessment and coordinate the response," the EPA official explained. "It's a big project, probably 8 to 10 months of work." Shakira looked out the window at Pine Valley's quiet main street. Children were playing in the park where contaminated soil had once threatened their health. Jake was washing the windows of his gas station, which now operated with the most advanced environmental monitoring systems in the region. "I'll need to bring in additional expertise for a project that size," she said. "That's fine. You have authority to assemble whatever team you need." After hanging up, Shakira pulled out Carlos's business card and smiled. Sometimes the best solutions came from bringing together people with complementary skills and shared values. Chapter 13. Legacy. The Arizona project became the largest environmental emergency response that Shakira had ever coordinated. Working with Carlos and a team of specialists, they successfully contained contamination that had threatened 8 separate communities and developed a long-term cleanup plan that would restore the area to safe conditions. The success of the Arizona operation led to recognition from the EPA administrator and invitations to speak at national conferences on environmental emergency response. Shakira found herself becoming an advocate for community-based approaches to environmental protection, arguing that local involvement was essential for effective solutions. Communities know their own needs and resources better than outside experts, she told a conference of environmental professionals in Washington, D.C. Our job is to provide technical expertise and support, not to impose solutions from the outside. The approach she had developed, combining technical knowledge with community engagement, was being adopted by environmental agencies across the country. Pine Valley had become a case study taught in environmental science programs, and the town regularly hosted visits from officials and students wanting to learn about community-based emergency response. But for Shakira, the most satisfying moments came during quiet conversations with residents of communities she had helped, like Mrs. Henderson in Pine Valley, who no longer worried about her well water, or the school principal in New Mexico, who could assure parents that their children's playground was safe, or the young mother in Utah, who could nurse her baby without fear of contaminated drinking water. The work would never be finished. There would always be another community facing environmental threats, another family worried about their children's health, another small town that needed someone willing to take responsibility for protecting what mattered most. But that was okay. Shakira had found her purpose in bridging the gap between technical expertise and community need. She had learned that the most important work often happened in places that nobody else was paying attention to, among people who deserved protection but didn't always know how to get it. As she began planning for her next assignment, a chemical contamination case in rural Montana, Shakira reflected on the journey that had brought her from offshore oil platforms to small-town environmental protection. It hadn't been a straight line, and it hadn't been easy. But it had led her to work that used all of her skills in service of something larger than corporate profits or industrial efficiency. The Mountain View Inn would always be her home base, and Pine Valley would always be the community that had taught her the true meaning of environmental stewardship. But her real home now was wherever communities needed help protecting themselves from threats they couldn't handle alone. Epilogue. The continuing journey. 5 years after the Pine Valley crisis, Shakira stood before a congressional subcommittee in Washington, D.C., testifying about the need for increased funding for community-based environmental emergency response programs. Small communities are often the first to experience environmental contamination, but they're usually the last to receive help, she told the assembled lawmakers. We need to support communities in developing their own capacity to identify and respond to environmental threats. Her testimony was part of a broader effort to expand the program she had helped develop into a national initiative. The success stories from Pine Valley and dozens of other communities had demonstrated that rapid, community-based response could prevent small environmental problems from becoming major disasters. After the hearing, Shakira walked through the corridors of the Capitol building, thinking about how far she had come from her days on offshore oil platforms. The work was different now, but the fundamental mission remained the same: protecting people from environmental hazards that could threaten their health and safety. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Tom Bradley. New guest at the inn asking about environmental consulting. Says there's a problem with groundwater contamination near a school in Nebraska. Should I give her your number? Shakira smiled as she typed her response. On my way back tomorrow. Tell her I'll be happy to help. The work would continue, one community at a time, one family at a time, one crisis at a time. Because sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on grand stages or in corporate boardrooms. Sometimes they were fought in small towns where children played in parks that needed to be safe, where families drank water that needed to be clean, and where communities depended on someone willing to stand up and take responsibility when danger threatened everything they held dear. For Shakira Martinez, former oil platform safety inspector turned community environmental guardian, that was exactly how she wanted to spend the rest of her career. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.